All right, thank you guys so much for joining, and it's so great to meet you guys. Like Ian said, my name is Anissa Gardizy, and I'm a tech reporter at the Boston Globe. So we're going to start off today's week by talking about building a global blockchain hub. But before we do that, I thought we could start with some introductions. So Kerty, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Beyond what Ian said. All right. Let me just give a couple framework moments. I'm a global person. I've lived all over the world, born in Japan. I've been to 13 schools. So I have a very global perspective on everything. And my background is in general management, strategy, mostly the marketing side of business, biz dev. I've worked in startups. I worked in larger organizations. And so really culminating in becoming a managing director is sort of the thing that led me there was just my interest in working with people. I love working with founders. It's my personal passion, helping them succeed. And so, anything else you can see on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'm a total opposite in terms of global. I've pretty much spent my entire academic and professional career based in Boston as a hub. But I've had it's been great and excited to see this energy and a bunch of people coming together around this space. But I actually went to school at Bentley University in Waltham, studying finance and accounting, and didn't do a technical pivot until I joined State Street in 2015 within their technology audit function. And I had a chance after about a year and a half to build out an emerging technologies team within the IT audit function that looked at everything from public cloud to robotics to machine learning and AI, and then obviously a lot of work on the blockchain side as well. Unfortunately, that blockchain work catered more towards permissioned blockchains, and I had already drank the Kool-Aid of public blockchains and crypto. And so in 2018, as Ian mentioned, I left State Street to join KPMG, based out of Boston, but running a global advisory practice. The majority of our resources are based in the US, but we had folks in India as well that were supporting us on the tech side. And that was a great experience, and I got to see a lot of major players in Boston emerge over that time. But frankly, since then, I've been more focused on outside of Boston and on a global level. So I'm excited to be back in the community and look forward to engaging with you guys and sharing perspectives from the venture side that I now sit on.
Thank you, Sal. So as Ian mentioned, John O'Keefe, co-founder of QUBIC Labs. We've been working on this now for 3 years. We initially had the idea that we wanted to, could we create 1,000 tech jobs in the next 5 to 10 years? And we picked ultimately an emerging technology because we felt that is where people don't have a community. That is where we can bring people together and kind of use our skill sets to bring everyone to the table and execute on that. I have a background in financial services and nonprofit management. I've lived in Boston for 8 years. The last 2 years, I actually live in Portland, Maine. So I work down here a couple of days a week and work from home Monday and Fridays. And I've also done door-to-door sales. I've managed nightclubs. And I am no longer in corporate America because I absolutely cannot do what I'm told. And this, I find that working with the entrepreneurs in our space is very exciting, and it's what I love to do. So happy to be here today, and thank you for coming.
So John, I want to start with you. Last year, QUBIC Labs put out a white paper, which if you guys haven't read, you definitely should. It's very helpful in understanding what you guys are trying to do and building an ecosystem here. But what did you find after doing that white paper, and why does that convince you that you can build a blockchain hub here?
So we did a white paper on blockchain talent leaving Massachusetts completely disproportional to the amount it was creating. And it dovetailed into a couple of things we were working on at the time. We had testified to the House Committee on AI and Cybersecurity about the need to invest in these emerging technologies, and particularly blockchain, because that's what we were interested in. And we knew that the state was very interested in that. From a talent perspective then, we knew we were leaking talent, but we needed to get some data behind that. So we partnered with a group called Identix. They got some data for us, and we found out that there was a lot of states we graphed out that were seen to be more friendly to digital natives, to people in that space. However, we also knew that, for example, talent might move to Florida, just to pick one, because there's a complete lack of, it's a good sandbox for entrepreneurs. There's not a bunch of regulation there. But we also knew, like fintech in the Valley, that when it comes to mainstream adoption, Massachusetts is still, ideally situated to take advantage of that and to encourage mainstream adoption up here, like that fintech in the Valley. And we ultimately said, you know what, we haven't missed a boat on this. We just need to encourage the proper investment and the proper support and get the proper stakeholders around the table and really get Massachusetts moving. And that actually culminated in us getting a $2 million grant from the state a couple of months back to build a first-of-a-kind public-private blockchain R&D facility here in Massachusetts and headquartered in Quincy.
And Saul, do you have a perspective on that, sort of having that global focus? What role Massachusetts could play in being a hub for blockchain talent and companies?
Yeah, it's really interesting, even just hearing you speak, John, about kind of the mission and vision of what you guys are building. And it addresses kind of a phenomenon that I experienced myself in my friend groups, because a lot of the early folks that I built friendships with from the crypto space ended up migrating from Boston down to Miami or to Puerto Rico or to Portugal, largely on a, just from a regulatory perspective and tax perspective, a lot more clarity. And I think in certain circumstances like Miami, very forward marketing, PR engagement from leadership, which it seems like you guys are rallying here, and that's super exciting. But I think, yeah, firsthand, I've definitely seen somewhat of a talent flight from people who were very early into this space. And I think there's opportunity to reverse that curve, this being a starting point in that journey. But it's unfortunate because the outcomes of that are the businesses that are built around them migrating as well. So whether it's a private equity group or a company that's building a startup and seeking clarity at a state level and engagement with kind of the policy side. So I think there's huge opportunity based on the history of Boston, the academic presence that we have here, and frankly, the production of human capital that's already played out coming out of the city, which has been remarkable on a relative basis. So,
and why is your firm based in Boston?
So my partners, Tom Saris and Bettina Warburg, grew up in the greater Boston area. They were in the Silicon Valley space for a decade and saw kind of the talent migrate out of Silicon Valley in the 2015 to 17 timeframe, and so they moved home to be around family. I was already based in Boston as well, and we had started to build a relationship. So when I moved after Next Steps, it made sense to build kind of the investment advisor practice here. And so we're proudly in the greater Boston area and excited to be supporting this initiative.
Got it. So Kerty, you're running the new Techstars Boston Crypto Accelerator. So do you want to talk about that and how it's been going so far? I know applications are open, so
yeah,
how many people are applying?
It's very new. So, but one of the reasons why we did pick Boston was because of our Algorand partnership. But I can talk about that more in detail. But we did see the opportunity with the ecosystem here that we could really build an incredible accelerator, not necessarily for all Boston-based companies, but global companies, but introduce them to Boston as part of the process. So that was a huge opportunity. But given that Algorand is founded here, and there are so many mentors and investors and others in the ecosystem, we thought this was a great place to be. So right now the apps are open, but our accelerator runs from January to April, and it will be hybrid in true blockchain fashion. So we'll have the kickoff here in Boston, we'll have the ending events here in Boston, and in between there'll be a component of virtual and travel. And to that note, I will say, having worked in ecosystem development before, I'm a subscriber to the Ecosystem Way by Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway. You need so many different nodes, and I think QUBIC's a great example of setting up that infrastructure node and the place mode and place for founders to develop. But you really need all of them to lean in. And so the more you can do to bring that ecosystem together, the better. And that is a role that Techstars plays. Finding events, finding meaning to bring founders and investors and mentors and everyone else in the ecosystem together.
And so when you look at the Boston landscape, as it relates to Web3, blockchain, crypto, what is missing, or why isn't Boston right now considered, the hub that some other cities are?
And this is my tertiary glance, but we need more founders. We need way more founders. And so if we can help in that way, founders who are thinking big, founders who are risk takers, founders who want to lean in, I also am not a us versus them person. So I think, taking the attitude of, yes, let's build something amazing here, but there are other hubs out there. So let's figure out, how do we get noticed in those hubs? How is there cross-pollination? I mean, blockchains are now looking at greater interoperability. We should have hubs that are interoperating with each other because they're different areas that are serviced in each hub.
I mean, maybe I can just add on
Yeah,
that,
go for
because
it.
what wasn't here 2 to 3 years ago in my experience was this event and these organizations, which play a critical role in bridging the gap between the policy side and policymakers and the private sector. And then I think another thing that really comes together is the relationship that you've described with a layer 1 blockchain, right? If we think about this from 2 ends of the spectrum, one is the policy side, the other is the foundation of the technology we're building on. And there's these huge foundations that are very well capitalized, that are designed to drive the ecosystem development on top of their networks. And so partnerships like that will allow for capital investment to back programs that actually seed early stage entrepreneurs coming out of the private sector. And when that's married with work like what you're doing on the QUBIC side, on the policy front, really, really cool things can happen. So I think the framework that's being put in place here really can drive progress in kind of the vision that Ian was describing.
And John, what are you guys doing on the policy front, or what role does policy play in your mission?
So we, I guess to the point of all the different stakeholders, we made a decision early on that we're going to try and give value first as opposed to kind of take. So we set up a tax exempt structure, and we were very lucky that one of our partners, Fox Rock Properties, actually gave us the premises to use for our incubator for a number of years. And what we did with that is we take those savings and we push them down to the entrepreneurs. So the idea being is that instead of spending thousands of dollars on overhead and rent and all that stuff, they're really spending the funds in the places that are needed: strategic hires, product development, and so that's one aspect of, like, as a tax exempt organization, we are well situated to give first, and ultimately what that means is that there's no angle. If you deal with the VC firms or pick any industry, everyone's got their own specific angle, and what we understand is everyone has a return on investment. What is that return on investment they wish to seek, and can we provide that? And to that point, one of those stakeholders is the legislature. Now my colleague Ian is a little bit more up to date on the political side, but what we have started to notice is that they're starting to reach out to us saying, hey, what do you guys think about this? Do you have any research on X, Y, Z? And all we're doing at the moment, instead of pushing specific policy, is just educating. So this is what we think. This is what we're seeing. One of the areas, anecdotally, I specifically think there's an issue, is that a lot of the way public policy is written at the moment is not set up for kind of next-gen technologies. I see that in a number of places. We could talk about it, and we've done some recent grant work, and like, how do you explain that, the accountants say, well, this funding you got has to be for capital expenditures. There isn't a word for some of the stuff we're doing. We don't even know where to start to go spend this money, because it's for next-gen technologies, and infrastructure now isn't on the ground, it's in the air. So we're kind of waiting up for kind of the way things are written to catch up with the way things are, and then we're just trying to give as much education as we can from what we're seeing to legislators when we do reach out. But we are seeing an increase in it, and we anticipate an increase in it going forward, and being even more involved in what comes up. So.
And Sal, do you have a perspective on what role policymakers play, and whether a city or a state will emerge as a leader in a specific space?
I think it starts, so absolutely, but I think it starts with education. And it's a very, very tall order. The education scope that we talk about here is pretty vast, because the institutions and systems in society that will be impacted the most by this technology are inherently the most complex. It's financial services, it's governments, it's large, very complex businesses or organizations. And so generally speaking, there's a level of competency or aptitude for specific knowledge domains that traverses a bunch of areas. And so when we talk about Web3 and we talk about DeFi, for example, now we're talking about this idea of primitives being embedded across every industry segment. And so everything is inherently financial. And how do we contemplate that from a policy side when traditionally financial services was ring-fenced inside of an industry segment that was regulated by the SEC and the CFTC and other regulators. And so I think the biggest step forward is just education and engagement. I love hearing that they're coming to you now, and I think that's super important to have the demand side there. And then the last piece is really tone at the top. Like it comes down to actually walking and driving momentum with the positions of officials that have the ability to do that. I think what Miami has done in some regards has been extremely progressive, sometimes moved too fast and maybe could have done things more thoughtfully. But it's just a demonstration of what can happen when tone and messaging come from the very top.
Mm-hmm. And Kerty, I wanted to ask you about decentralization. I mean, I've been asking a lot of people whether Boston or Massachusetts will emerge as a blockchain hub. And one thing people ask is if everything's decentralized, why would there need to be a centralized hub or a hub in one specific location in general? So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think people need to think about both the, online, in real life, and also what's going on that's all remote and decentralized. So it's really around, I would say, talent, around who you're partnering with, who you want to see in a real life way. But I think it's the support structure, because entities, yes, you can be 100% decentralized. Every single organization out there is dealing with it. It's not just a blockchain issue, but really having a location that is really a supportive location, I think, is probably the argument. But you can make that both for blockchain and not. But some of the things that you're talking about with regard to regulatory, really great business, business friendly, blockchain friendly, DAO friendly. I mean, anything that is friendly for anyone building on blockchain, if that's here, then this is where you want your headquarters to be. And it sounds like Boston and Massachusetts are nailing it. So, and thoughtfully, not like ad hoc going too quickly. So we may see some migration from some of the failed attempts if it's done really well.
And one thing I think is worth taking into account is, we're dealing with, like, whether it's, the government or the state with, taxpayer funds. Like, ultimately, we've had quite a bit of support from the state and from the municipality. But even though it's coming from them, there's some person in a room somewhere that, when all the paperwork is in, makes a decision that says we're going to fund this. And it's much easier to fund something that's tried and tested. But there are people sitting in certain places that say, no, like, to compete, we have to get in new industries. And to do that, we have to fund things that we may not know a huge amount about, but we think this is the future, so we're going to take a risk on that. And I think in Massachusetts, and even in our local municipality here in Quincy, we've been exceptionally lucky to have people that, when all is said and done, they said, we're going to take a shot on this. So I think having those people in the legislature or in the local municipality or in the state that say, we have to be brave to move forward, but we're going to do it because otherwise we're just stagnating, and we're lucky to have them here in Massachusetts.
And Sal, right now, do you see Boston and Massachusetts as a blockchain-friendly place, or are there certain things you think need to happen?
It's a good question, and I think some of it's within the control and some of it's outside the control. So the biggest impact, I think, will probably be through progression of state level perspectives on the treatment of things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAO, where, in the case of Wyoming, there's been legislation advanced that think about this new business model architecture and apply a regulatory framework around that. And in doing so, they give founders certainty that if they go and launch their project in Cheyenne and fall under the Wyoming regulatory framework, that they can permissibly do the things they're intending to do without taking on personal regulatory risk, which is often a founder's concern that drives a decision model of where they build the business. So some of that's at the state level, but then part of this is the things that we've been talking about here, building a community, recognizing the human capital talent that has already been incubated and built in the city, and frankly, the pipelines that will come down the road, just given the academic presence that we have in Boston. So, there's some things that I think we can all work on together, and there's some things that we are all residents of a state and have the ability to vote and should exercise that right.
Mm-hmm. And John, what are your thoughts on the role the universities play here locally in developing this talent and working with groups like yours?
So I have quite an amount to say on this subject, but I'm going to keep it very brief. I think as a whole, the university model needs to be changed. In this space specifically, what I see is a lot of people that are theoretically very strong, but they can't build anything. And ultimately, I think that what we focused on at QUBIC Labs is, there's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of different talk about different things, a lot of theoretical knowledge. Let's focus on building something all the time. Let's bring founders in that are building consistently. And as that regards to the educational systems, I see the same thing, very theoretically heavy, but are these students coming out are they coming out and building something? And then you take it a step further and you realize the idea of university itself isn't very decentralized. It's not in with the zeitgeist of kind of blockchain and decentralization. So, what I would love to see is a couple of curriculum based on building, but not just that. We've a bunch of issues in the country with wealth inequality, where you can really solve that as an emerging technology, where we could have kids do 6 to 8 month curriculums and come out with $100,000 a year jobs off the bat and not be kind of crippled with college debt, which they, that money should be for when they build their housing. So I really think in these emerging tech industries, the educational and academic institutions should take a step back and say, let's do something different. This is a new trade school of the future, but it's not carpentry or plumbing. It is actually coding, blockchain work, and building those type of things. So I'm excited to see what comes in the space, but I also think they could do a lot more.
And Kerty, what are some of the pillars of ecosystem building that you sort of look for in different hubs around the country? Different things that sort of need to come together for an ecosystem to be thriving?
Well, I'll say for setting up Techstars here, which is really, even though Techstars Boston exists, setting up crypto is a whole different piece. We're looking for investors. So who's interested in the founders who are going to be building things? And so reaching out to those. And I'm reaching out to investors across the globe and introducing them to Boston. I'm also looking for mentors, people, and again, across the globe, people who know a lot about infrastructure, people who know about community, they know about growth building and blockchain. It's a whole different, in a regular business program or any regular Techstars Accelerator, you might have financial modeling. Well, that looks very different in blockchain. You might have a session on, traditional marketing. That looks quite different. So reaching out and then setting up all of the coaching and learning that we're going to do and be able to wrap around the founders. Also, just, founders who are interested. So one of the things we do in establishing a location with an accelerator is we introduce them to the right hub they need to be in. So we are asking founders from across the globe to move here for the in-person portions of our program. And with that, it's not just about sitting in a co-working space, it's about getting out around the community. We might have events at one place, we might have events, down here, we might have events over at Algorand, we will have events over at Algorand, but throughout the community. And so really integrating them and making them feel like, oh, this could really be a home for me long-term. I always hesitate to say that because no one's permanent anymore. It feels like everyone's moving around, but that they would feel welcome in Boston no matter what.
Are you getting a sense for how people feel about moving to Boston, or is it too early to tell?
Oh, I'm sure anyone who is applying to the Accelerator is excited to be here, to be part of the Accelerator. So that's not an issue. And personal moves, I have no idea what people are interested in. But I will tell you this. I spent 2 years here in business school. I loved Boston. And for whatever reason, my career took me elsewhere. And I've loved staying in touch with Boston. I have so many friends here, so many people in my network who are still here. I love coming back. And I'm really excited to be here for this Accelerator.
And I've talked to Ian a little bit about the culture wars in blockchain. Different people want to live in different places for different reasons. And Sal, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on whether there is a blockchain culture here. Is this somewhere that people want to build versus, the other hubs that we mentioned earlier?
Good question. I think it's kind of interesting in that a lot of what's driven actual blockchain hubs is this regulatory clarity piece and the tax side. So Lisbon over the past 2 years has become this massive development hub inside of Portugal in a very, very tax-friendly environment. Now they're walking that back under EU pressure to potentially advance more aggressive tax positions on crypto. That really is the driving factor of where founders ultimately reside, because a lot of their wealth creation and in terms of economic interactions happen in crypto. Yeah. And so there's material implications to one treatment versus another, specifically on staking as an example. And so the tax environment, I think, is like the primary driver, unfortunately, and that's a piece that, again, is like generally outside of control. But on a general basis, there's been a massive presence in Boston from the moment that Fidelity launched Fidelity Digital Assets, right? That put institutionalization of crypto on the map in every bank across the entire world. And that happened in Boston, right? Mm-hmm. One of the largest institutional data companies that was backed by Fidelity, Coinmetrics, is still headquartered in Boston. There's L1 blockchains that are based here. There's incredible, there really is a large community. And I think the components that we're talking about with public, private sector, and incubators and collaboration really were the pieces that were absent. So hopefully some of this culture can really just rise out of people coming together around events like this.
John, is that what you're hoping for events like this, and bringing people together? What's sort of your vision for what Boston Blockchain Week will be this week and will be in the future? So
we see that there's a lot of smaller kind of events go on during the fall, and we really feel that they should all come under one roof. Not necessarily run by QUBIC Labs, but just that, I look at something like South by Southwest. Can we do a North by Northeast? Can we have an iconic tech event on the East Coast that is a go-to with 10, 15, 20,000 people every year? That's where we would like to go with something like this, and ultimately bring everyone into the table. This is year one. We haven't it all figured out. There's a truck behind me as we speak that's too loud. We had no electricity at 7 o'clock yesterday evening, but we also know there is enough here to build on, and we see the interest, and we know that next year we can double it in size, we can do it again. And ultimately, it's not about QUBIC Labs, it's can we plug in our partners? We would love to see next year whole days built on the blockchain aspect of gaming, on the regulatory aspect. So we have big plans for this moving forward. And we would just, again, it doesn't happen without the sponsors on the one hand, the local municipality on the state on the other, and the founders and attendees. So we just urge them, keep on coming and keep interested, and we see where we go.
And I know QUBIC Labs has been doing a lot of work on the education side of things, making sure people understand what you're doing, what this new industry is. How has that been going? Is it easier or harder, depending on the market?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to explain to someone. If you turn around tomorrow and you heard the mayor just say he doesn't understand, that's probably 90% of people. Most people, we specifically pick blockchain and not, let's say, a subset like crypto, because blockchain is a tool. It's very utilitarian. It can support a lot of other types of business. And ultimately, though, it's like someone saying to someone, "Explain to me how your MasterCard works." It doesn't really matter. It just works. It just supports what you're doing. And in that case, I've kind of gone away from trying to explain it and say, "This is what this will do for you," And the other side of it too is that someone said to me recently, and they were so spot on with it, that it doesn't matter what the underlying technology is if you don't have a good business. If that's just the underlying technology. Is your business sound? Is it commercially viable? Does it make sense? There are so many more things that go into it. The team, the ability to scale it up. So we've kind of looked at it more like, yeah, blockchain's awesome, but it still has to support a business that has to stand up in its own right and be a good business idea. So in fact, it actually adds a level of complexity sometimes, because now not only do you have to have a great business, but you got a new technology underneath it that not everyone understands, and you got to make sure you understand it and have the tech team that can take it and run with it as it scales. Mm-hmm. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that definitely made sense. I think you're right. A lot of people still think, is blockchain just looking for a problem that it can solve. Sal, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. How do you sort of keep the bigger picture in your vision as you're thinking about what it is today versus what you're hoping it's going to be in a few years?
Yeah, that's a really, really big question, just because of kind of my belief system around the technology. And I was explaining this to a gentleman, I think Paul, as I was waiting to come into this event. But part of the reason I was so drawn to blockchain technology holistically was because the applications are so diverse. You're effectively reinventing inventing a new layer of internet architectures that enable all sorts of new interesting things. And so, for me, it's like, if the wave of technology and things that are happening now are focused on building out this core infrastructure, then the opportunities to align to things that I'm very passionate about, environmental sciences, climate change, more fair financial services. A lot of those things are outcomes that can be achieved through the development of the right types of infrastructure. And so I think that's where I've kind of aligned to the space and just trying to push forward great founders and entrepreneurs and supporting them and growing, but also driving, building the foundation from which a lot of these things that I experienced as broken can change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got it.
I'll just add on. I mean, we sit here comfortably in Boston, but 2/3 of the world, they don't operate through banks. They don't have accessibility to a lot of what the rest of the world does. I heard a story from a friend about 1.5 years ago who said, he's Filipino descent, and he said his grandmother was using Bitcoin to buy groceries. And when he said that, I said, okay, this is not going away. Mm-hmm. This is not hype. There's obviously, you hear about all the bad things that happen out there, but there's a real use to the underlying structure here. And I would say that one of the themes I'm hearing, and one of the things we're looking for too, is a little bit of how can we make it easier? I think you were saying, for the entry of someone who's not, I think there's something like 83 million wallets out there. I saw the stat somewhere, I can't verify it, but that's a very small number. And why should wallet be a blocker for anyone to utilize services on blockchain? It just doesn't make sense to me. And so there's this concept of Web 2.5, which might be like a nice, friendly entry point where you don't need to see necessarily what's going on in the back end. There are some people who are very concerned with like full anonymity, and there are bad actors in that area. There are also good actors in that area too. But do you need to have full anonymity to still own your data and be protected as a citizen? So there are a lot of philosophical questions out there too to be answered. But if we're going to allow more people accessibility, we need to be able to make it easier to participate.
Yeah, going off of that, did you want to talk a little bit about what QUBIC Labs is trying to do with Quincy Community College in terms of working with them on education?
Yeah, I think I touched on it, and we're a little early in the discussions, but again, the idea being is like, hey, you know what, we can make a sincere impact here by encouraging the adoption of new technology, and how can we create a curriculum, and how can we support a curriculum where colleges maybe traditionally had those traditional kind of nursing degrees and those kind of traditional degrees. How can we help them do an emerging technology degree, and that we would help, bring in the experts to support the teaching of it and help them build stuff and walk out where you have a future where suddenly I don't have 200 or 300 grand in college debt, but I paid community college fees, and ultimately I am set up to get a good start. And in that respect, that's why emerging technologies are awesome, because the system isn't set up yet. So that's why there's no I won't say it's rigged, but there's no going into something and it's, this is the path for me. There's no path. No one knows which way this is going to go. No one knows what particular aspects of this emerging technology are going to be very successful. So everyone's at ground zero, and I think that's a great spot for students to come in and start off in a new career where they can make a substantial wage and compete.
Are we out of time, or do we have time for more questions? Okay, yeah, Kerty, I know we were talking this morning about sort of the events that are going on this week, and we were talking about the Women in Blockchain event tonight. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how important it is to bring more diversity into the space as these different hubs are forming right now.
Thanks for bringing that up. So one of the things that we wanted to get the message out there very widely was we want to have as many people as possible look at building something in blockchain. And so we're really, really careful to keep the message very wide and then do some outbound reach outs to organizations to ensure that different founders, people who maybe aren't necessarily skilled on the coding side, but maybe they understand a lot about a certain market that has the need for this technology. We're bringing them into the funnel, and we're meeting with as many people as we can. So we're bringing on someone part-time right now to help us get through just the applications that are coming through. So yeah, I want that funnel to be as wide open as possible.
And do you guys have anything else to add before we wrap up this panel?
I mean, maybe just a reflection of a couple points that I've already made, but like I extremely appreciate the work that went on to bring this group together. Excited for the remainder of the panels and discussions, and I think the lineup that you've been able to bring together has been awesome. So huge hats off to both of you and the team behind this. And I'm excited, and I hope this is truly seeds to a growth pattern that leads to a lot of the community coming together, because it's been very fragmented and disparate, and I think there's now something that we can build around. I know for one, I'm excited to be a part of it, to engage with you all in whatever projects you're building, or if you're peers in the buy side and investing in companies, or if you're working at enterprises that are contemplating crypto strategies. So looking forward to everything that comes out of this, but appreciate the space, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Sal. Yeah, we have, nice 2 or 3 days of content, some very human stories, big focus on startups. And I think what it takes to grow communities like this in emerging tech is just sheer bloody mindedness. So like, hey, we're going to do that, and we'll figure out how we do it, down the road. And I think everyone in this space who are here today is kind of a subset of that. Like, they're all working on individual things, but we're part of this greater ecosystem. We're helping one another out. So just encourage after the conference and moving forward, if there's anyone you'd like to chat to or follow up with, please do so. And thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the next 2 days.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.